Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I am a divorce lawyer who is passionate about helping you use the adversity and difficult things in your life to grow and show up as the best version of yourself. Aaron Bender, are you here today?
I am here today, and we have a licensed marriage family therapist on the show today, an author as well.
Yes.
A book all about co-parenting. I could imagine how some of the stories that, not stories, but some of the cases that have filed through this firm, some nasty co-parenting.
Yes.
Or there's no co in their co-parenting.
That's right. It's just parenting. It's just parenting. We call that parallel parenting or dysfunctional parenting. The thing about these co-parenting dynamics is it is so gradual and nuanced and slight, and it is so insidious and damaging. Like, it's hard to just say like, oh yes, here's a story of what happened and tell it to you in 10 minutes or less, because it's over the long haul, and it's just like, it's nuts. I mean, I always say if two parents just truly looked out for the kids, there would be very little conflict, but we all have so many other things going on that's rarely the case. We are joined today by Aurisha Smolarski, licensed marriage and family therapist right here in Los Angeles, California, and author of this excellent, excellent book, Cooperative Co-Parenting for Secure Kids. Aurisha, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Holly. It's so good to meet you.
Yes, likewise. So I read this book, and I have to say, this is so useful. And for our watchers and listeners, if you are in a co-parenting situation, you absolutely should get this book. It has so many useful tools. It's not just a bunch of text, right, Aurisha? Like, there's phrases in here you can use, there's charts, there's a lot of really useful stuff. So I just wanted to start off by saying how very useful this book is, and thank you for writing a book like this.
Well, thank you for reading it and for recommending it to others. It's been a pleasure diving into that whole experience.
Yeah, what led you to kind of focus on co-parenting?
Well, I guess through my own experience of becoming a co-parent. I was, as you know, I'm a therapist, and I was focusing a lot on relationships. I'm passionate about relationships, about attachment theory. Why do we do what we do? And once I became a co-parent, I realized that this was still a relationship. But I also, at first, my co-parenting relationship was full of conflict and tension, as, often a lot of people talk about. Yeah. And I could see that my child was struggling, and I knew I needed to do something. And so I decided to, bring in a lot of the tools that I use working with couples in how to be in a healthy relationship to the co-parenting relationship, using attachment theory and other relationship strategies. And I noticed that it started to make a difference, because fundamentally it still is a relationship. It's just that the rules are a little different. Now it's just solely about your child. And so that really helped me refocus and learn, relearn in a way how to be in this new relationship with the same person.
Yes.
And I also learned to rely on myself. I knew I couldn't really count on my co-parent to make the changes, but, sometimes it only takes one person to shift a dynamic. And so I offer that as inspiration and as hope to co-parents, because often you can't get your co-parent to read the book. But, if you learn more about yourself and also about your co-parent, you can start to minimize the triggers and not step on the landmines, and hopefully, start to move into a healthier dynamic.
Yes. So later, not just yet, but later, that is one of my biggest burning questions for you, is how to get the other person on board. But I want to save that for now, because I want to first start off with probably one of the most interesting, I don't want to say the most interesting things about your book, but something new that I learned from your book, or haven't really thought about it in this same way before, is how attachment theory really comes into play with your co-parenting relationship. We literally just did a podcast episode on attachment theory.
Okay.
But, we focused on it in the context of like romantic relationships, dating, really more so in the context of dating, And I've never thought about it in terms of how that can affect. I have thought about it in terms of how, what attachment theory are my kids going to have, or do they already have because of, what errors I've made, or hopefully maybe not made. But I've never thought about it in the context of how that really informs your co-parenting relationship. So can you start us off just by kind of explaining that a little bit?
Yeah. So, as I alluded to, right, our attachment styles precede our relationship. They originate early on in childhood. I definitely recommend people who are listening to this to listen to your other podcast to get some more of that information. But, a lot of our attachment wounds and our attachment styles are adaptive behaviors depending on how present and available and reliable our caregivers were to us as infants. And those adaptive patterns follow us through our adulthood and into our adult relationships, and often show up in our romantic relationships. What happens during a breakup is a separation, and that is the exact catalyst that actually activates our attachment system to go into high gear. Meaning, what do I need to do in order to alert somebody, if you're a child, that I need help, that I need soothing, that I need care, that I need, protection. So the separation is the actual catalyst. For some people, when they're romantically involved, it might be the conflict. But, and so during a breakup, you're actually in the highest form of need, right? And so all of your attachment, I call them attachment cables in the book, are activated. And you're still looking towards the most recent person who held that role of attachment figure, which was your romantic partner, to get those needs met. The thing is they are no longer, or should no longer be, your go-to person. So in the book, I talk a lot about unplugging those attachment needs to be seen and to feel worthy and to feel loved and good enough and all those things. You have to unplug those from your ex-spouse so that you can move into this new relationship with the same, like I mentioned, with the same person, but now you're in a co-parenting relationship. Right. So they're no longer your go-to person. They're no longer your attachment figure.
Yes, and that was really mind-blowing for me. First, the part where you said, and I'm actually reading it from your book, separations send our attachment system into high gear. They create new stress, amplify existing or past stress, and undermine our feelings of security. This explains so much. I'm a divorce and custody lawyer, so I'm dealing with people that are sort of in this state of heightened emotion all the time. And I often ask myself, man, where did the love go? Where did the trust go between the two? Because they're going from, at one point, a loving, caring, trusting relationship to now this co-parenting disaster almost, where it's like every little text and every little email just sends them over the edge. And now I understand why, is because the separation is really causing them to go into this heightened state, and the attachment theory is kicking in, the attachment system is kicking in. And then something else that just really made so much sense is you say, even if you and your ex weren't good at soothing each other or providing the care and reliability you needed while together, you were wired such that you still went to each other for that security and to be each other's safe haven. And suddenly now, oh my gosh, the rules of the game have changed so drastically. And I think what you're saying is you've got to recognize that you've left that game behind. That game, those rules, those dynamics, that is long gone, right?
Yes. And now also, and now, so just to stack onto what you were saying, in addition to seeking that safety and security, when we're in a state of high stress and threat, all of our protective mechanisms go on board as well, right? And so that's also going to activate the seeking, soothing, and protection from the person that you're divorcing.
Right.
So that's also why people are in a heightened state, is because they're in fight, flight, right?
Yes.
Freeze or fawn, right? Depending on what your go-to is. Right. So your regulation system is also completely offline.
Yes. So tell us how, and you have, again, like I said, very practical tools in the book, but for just to sort of whet everybody's appetite, tell us how do you let go of, those old dynamics, the old rules to move to the new rules of this co-parenting relationship?
So I have that in the commitment chapter, and this is something that I find often gets overlooked. And I remember during my own separation, I was like begging our couples or, therapists to help us with this. Yeah. So basically, I think about it as you need to say goodbye to the romantic relationship so that you can then say hello to being on Team Kiddo, to being in a co-parenting relationship with that same person. And in doing this, in the book, I have a bunch of questions that you can go through, which really identifies all of those attachment-based needs, emotional needs, that's what creates a romantic relationship. That's what makes it different than a friendship or a colleague at work, is that you're looking for those attachment and emotional needs to be met. And so, it's not just the sex, obviously, right? There's like, please help me feel safe. It's not? So we need to intentionally say goodbye. Yeah. We often talk about closure, but when I talk about closure, it's not necessarily just like, doing it on your own, or I have to just, it really does mean you have to end one relationship with intentional goodbyes. And that can mean you say goodbye to some of the things that you did like about the relationship, some of the things that really were hurtful, all the ways that you sought connection, all the things that made you a couple, right? And then intentionally you say hello to the other parent of my child, say hello to being on Team Kiddo. And that way you're aligning both people to be on the same team instead of being adversaries.
Right. So I love that. And that makes all the sense in the world on paper. You and I talk like it's like, yes, let's all do that. In my experience, again, as a divorce and custody lawyer, people have a very hard time doing that. Do you think they have a hard time sort of shifting from one dynamic to one relationship, the romantic relationship, to the co-parenting relationship? Do you think they have a hard time making that shift because, one, they either don't know that they need to say goodbye to that and hello to the new relationship, or is it because it's really hard to say goodbye to the old relationship, or is it both?
I'd say both.
Okay.
And I think it depends also on your attachment style. The more secure you are, the more easily adaptable and flexible you are to making that mindset shift.
Right.
I think someone who has more of an anxious attachment style tends to cling to the past. They tend to go back in the past to try to fix the old wounds and get repair. That's done. Someone who's more avoidant is like, out of here, we're moving to the future.
Right.
But they're not in the present. And so they may be more rigid, or just create scenarios where the person doesn't feel acknowledged, right? And so both of those strategies don't lend itself very well to being in the present, which is we need to actually see what's very much needed, which is all about the child, right? So this mindset shift moves away from you and me as a romantic relationship to kiddo, and we are here to support everything that kiddo needs. And so I do think that it's a combination of they're triggered, they're in crisis mode, they're in trauma mode, they are self-oriented. And I'm not talking about selfish in the sense of narcissism or borderline or all that. I'm talking about that attachment system, that safety mechanisms that we all are wired to seek, right? Is on board.
Yeah.
So they can't see beyond that at that point.
Right. So, in my capacity as a lawyer doing what I do, I see a lot of conflict where I try to explain to the client, that's really just a difference in parenting style. It's not, we're not, the fact that one parent allows their kid to go to school without a jacket and you think that is just an aberration of parenting, it's really a difference in parenting style, right? One parent says, if the kid is cold, tomorrow they'll probably bring that jacket and like we'll all be okay, but I'm going to let them learn this lesson or, whatever. The other parent is like, no, they must, the kid must have a jacket. The other parent must send the jacket, just to use that as an example. And there's 1,000 other examples that are similar to that. And to me, that's a difference in parenting style. That's not something that I'm going to advise my clients to take to court and litigate over, should we send the kid to school with a jacket or not. And you have a chapter in here or a portion of the book about, I think you call it control-seeking behaviors.
Yeah.
And I feel like, well, you're the expert. Can you explain to us what these control-seeking behaviors are?
Well, the way I like to talk about it is it's like playing hot potato, right? Where
Yes.
You play, no one wants the hot potato, and you send it back and forth. So that's what conflict looks like. It's like people sending, and those hot potatoes are laden with our fears, our shame, our anxieties, our insecurities. That like I keep bringing it back to attachment because I feel like a lot of it originates early childhood stuff, and so control-seeking behaviors are where people are looking to maintain their own sense of safety, their own sense of worth, their own fears, like I don't want to be seen as a failure. And so they project those or they send those into that hot potato into the other parent, right? And they're like, now it's on you. And the other parent grabs that hot potato, they feel the heat of it, and they add their own stuff to it, and they send it back. Now, when we're feeling not in control, for example, when your kid is at the other parent's house and they're being sent to school without a jacket,
right,
you might feel out of control because your own parenting style, like you're talking about, your own values or your own needs to know might be coming up. And that's where someone might either turn towards criticism or blaming as a way to kind of seek control in a situation where they feel that they don't know what's happening. And that's really a reflection of themselves. Like, I don't do well when I'm not in control. So I'm going to, instead of feel that sense of insecurity, I'm going to project it onto you that you're doing something wrong, that you're bad, that you're, not parenting correctly. But fundamentally, it's really about your own insecurity, your own needs. And I think that when co-parents can shift that perspective onto what is happening for me right now. I'm feeling triggered. I'm blaming because I don't feel like I know what's happening. And people can say, well, it's for the best interest of the child because they're not going to get sick if they're wearing a jacket. But actually, you're trying to soothe your own need for control or comfort.
Yes. So if a parent finds themselves in that scenario where, they're projecting onto the other parent, under the guise of best interest of the child, but it is really about themselves, their need to control, their need to soothe themselves. What do they do? How do they get out of that?
Well, the first thing is I'd say learning to pause, because often these reactive behaviors are very fast and impulsive, and they are coming from this safety place, right? I need to feel safe. So if people can learn to pause and identify what are the feelings, what's going on inside of me, what are my needs, and then shift to what is actually in the best interest of the child, what actually does the kid need, moving it away from me, the parent, or the other parent. So disengaging again from that relationship, which is probably more based in the past, and moving towards the perspective of the child's needs. And the other thing is to, instead of blaming or trying to control the outward environment, use your own perspective. I'm noticing, right? That already is shifting back into a sense of actually healthy control.
Right.
When you speak from the I, when you use you language, you're giving your control away. And so that's what's backwards. In all of this sort of control seeking, it's a lot of the blame. It's a lot of like trying to manipulate what's happening in the outside world. But fundamentally, if you bring it back to yourself, you're actually going to feel more empowered, more in control, safer. And then your system's going to be calmer, and you're going to be able to respond more appropriately to the situation at hand, and to see more clearly what are the facts, and what does the child actually need, instead of what do I need, or what is, how do I want to change my co-parent?
Right. Okay, so speaking of changing your co-parent, you talk in the book about sort of coming together as co-parents and developing a shared vision for the child, right? Mm-hmm. And that is so beautiful and so wonderful and so amazing for the child or the children. But how on earth do you do that? How do people because the whole time I'm reading this book, I've got all my clients running through my mind, and I'm like, they're gonna tell me, but Holly, I'll do it all. I do it now perfectly, of course. But it's the other person. So speak to that.
Well, unfortunately, we can only control what we do in our own home. Mm-hmm. And so if you're working with one client, or if it's just you who's on board, then do everything you can do to create the value system that you want in your own home. Because a child fundamentally needs one safe and secure home in order to thrive. And it's also
so even
in the way
if the other home isn't the safe and secure environment, it's okay?
It's not ideal, but it is okay.
Right.
Your child, but if you focus on creating that safe haven for your child in your home, and do everything you can do to create consistency and value-based, upbringing that you want, your child is going to have one parent who they can rely on, who's consistent, who's available, right? That's going to teach them, this is what it feels like to be safe and secure. When they go to the other parent's house, and let's say it's not, in an extreme or less extreme way, they're going to feel the difference. And they're probably going to have a different attachment style relationship, or quality of a relationship with that parent. And they're going to have a more secure one with the parent who creates that safe haven. And I also suggest that, parents, again, they spend a lot of time they're not doing it. It's blame again. Like, losing energy in feeling anxiety about what's not happening at the other house, and feeling like it's causing a lot of harm to their child. Right. Instead, refocusing on, how do you talk about the differences? And in that way, the children learn about diversity. Like, things are different. That's reality. That's the reality of the world. There are different values in people's homes, between, teachers, even at school, between friendships that they have. And so you can talk about it as, well, at your dad's house, you go to church on Sunday, but here we don't believe in God, and you just talk about that's okay. And what are you learning when you go to church? Or what are you learning about, atheism or whatever, depending on the age of your child. So fundamentally, you're teaching your child to think for themselves, to develop critical thinking skills. So you can use the differences for teachable moments.
Okay, I love that. So I want to ask you about a real life example, and maybe, we really kind of just talked about it, but one of the sort of real life examples that seems to come up quite often is this situation where it's like, okay, yes, in this household, in mom's household, I've got my kids in sports because I want to teach them discipline and commitment and teamwork and all those things, and those are really important life lessons. Mm-hmm. And then they go to dad's house, and it's like, dad's like, nope, I'm not taking my time taking you to basketball or ballet or whatever the case may be. And so mom is incredibly frustrated because she's like, how am I supposed to teach my kids these life lessons and instill in them all these good things? And then children go to dad's house, and it's a different set of values. It's a different set of priorities. And how is my kid ever going to learn the things that I want to teach them? How should we handle that scenario?
Well, if mom is instilling those values, the kids are going to learn them. Okay. I think where this question comes up is around scheduling, right? Like, kids have, custody schedules, and so they're 50-50, let's say, or even 30-70 or whatever, but it's also about how follow through, right? How do you get those kids to their basketball practice or soccer practice if one parent's like, no, I'm not going to do it on my time? And I find that in addition to teaching those values, which you can do at your house, like, mom, go for it. You do you, and you teach the values you want to. That's how I would just and let dad teach the values he's teaching, which is, whatever he might be, which is, I'd rather you, best case scenario, I'd rather you read a book instead of go to soccer.
Yeah.
But often it's not that.
Right.
So, and then mom can talk to the kid about how do they stand up for themselves, about what they want, but I think the real struggle that I see with co-parents is it's like, the kid wants to go to soccer practice, but dad won't take them.
Yes.
And so there it's about, well, can the kid go to soccer practice? Sometimes. Or how does the kid stand up for themselves? Or can you do it in such a way where does mom have flexibility to take them and to bring them back? I think it really depends on the situation to figure that piece out. And that is where I think it gets most sticky, is where people withhold using the custody and the schedule. Well, it's my time, so I'm not going to take them somewhere. And that is actually hurting the child. Right. So if you can get dad on board to what does the child want, then maybe you can create some movement. But that's that's real, and it is tough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I think every day is if everybody was truly in it for the kid, we wouldn't, it would alleviate most of the conflict. I mean, occasionally you do truly have competing values that both parents believe, with all their heart that this is in the best interest of the child, and it's competing beliefs. But I would say 85% of the time, one or both parents has an ulterior motive, another agenda, and it's because it's a selfish reason, it's a spiteful thing, it's something else is going on.
Yes.
And
it's really to undermine the other parent, not because, the child. So actually, if I can work with both parents and I use value-based language, I generally find that there's more agreement around the values than the action and the behavior, right? It's like, I want kid to go to soccer. Well, no, I'm not taking him to soccer. Right. But if you move it from soccer to, like you said, team, would you like kiddo to learn how to be on a team and team playing? Yes. Okay. Well, what are some options that you think might be good for kiddo? He's expressed interest in this and this. What do you think? And if you bring on board collaborative language, like, what do you think is a classic one that I find can help a lot decrease the defensiveness. And instead of kid wants this, so you need to take him to that. A co-parent who is more like rigid on that and just wants to do what he wants to do, might, not be on board because of the way that it's introduced.
Right. That was one of my big takeaways from your book. And I think that's where attachment theory really comes into play, is like all the baggage from before is coming into play in these conversations. All the baggage, not only from, not just the romantic relationship, but our own childhood. It's like, oh my gosh, decades of stuff is all coming into play in these discussions over taking the kid to soccer or not taking them to soccer.
Right.
And it's like, we've got to sort of be, I think, from reading your book, it's like, you've got to kind of be aware of that and resolve that.
Yeah. I often will, instead of when people are trying to make a decision around this top level thing, I'll pause and move to like, let's have a value-based discussion. And, values fundamentally can divide people, but also they're raising the same child.
Right.
And they did meet each other. They were married. They most likely actually had a lot of values that they shared.
Right. Yes.
So getting them back to that. The other thing that I find can be really helpful to get people a little bit more on the same page is to look at this, at the concept of teamwork, right? Like, we are a team, right? And the collaboration is about values, but it's also like the two of you are not the same. You both bring in different sets of skills, just like on a soccer team. You've got the goalie, you've got I don't know all the soccer things, but you got the person who kicks the ball and the person, anyway, everyone has a different position on the field. They're not trying, you don't have two people trying to be goalie. You have one person because that person's awesome at it. And so I tend to ask in this value-based discussion is, what is your co-parent good at? What are their skills? What do they bring to your child? And everyone has something to say. That's positive, actually.
Yeah.
And then they switch, and I ask the other person, what does your co-parent bring to your child? What values and what skills do they bring to your child? How do you appreciate, how can you, and moving towards appreciation and acknowledgement language will already align them more on the same page. And I write that down so that they don't forget, because I'm going to be bringing that in all the time.
Said?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'm like, okay, great. So person A, you're really good at X, Y, and Z, and you're really good at A, B, C. Don't try to do your other person's job. Do yours. And your kid is then going to get A, B, C, and X, Y, Z. That's awesome. Your kid gets both of you. Right. So again, it's this whole idea of team and collaborators versus my way or your way. And you put them on the same team by acknowledging their different skill sets.
Yeah. I love that. That's really good. That's really helpful. Not only just, for the parents in a co-parenting relationship, but for me as a lawyer dealing with that, I'm definitely going to use that. What do you say to the parent? And of course there's two sides to every story, but a lot of my clients feel like they're the ones that are looking out for the child, and they're the ones that are always agreeing to switch time, and they're the ones that really are being flexible because it's good for the kid, and letting the kid do this with the other parent because, it's not my time, it's really the kid's time, all those great things. And they continually are sort of the parent that is team child, team kiddo, right, and always giving and always sort of putting their selfish desires aside, and the other parent is just always selfish. How do we console those parents? How do we help them? How do we alleviate the frustration that exists within that dynamic?
Yeah. So I have an exercise called plugging back into yourself, right? So that parent is frustrated because they're looking for something from the other parent. They're frustrated because if they were just by themselves, they're choosing to do all that because they want to. That's their choice. Wonderful. They're parenting in the way they want to. And the frustration and resentment comes from because the other parent isn't doing in the way that they would like them to do. So to identify that trigger of like, what is that need? What is that feeling? And to unplug. I'm not going to try to get that person to be me. Yeah. In order for me to validate that I'm doing what I think is a good job in parenting, right? Like I don't need that to be reflected in my co-parent. Right. And I think that if people can reclaim of just like my choices, I feel good about that, and not try to get the other person to do it your way. Yeah. Then like Mel Robbins does, let them. Yes. It's a really like the powerful two words. I'm all so on board for let them. Yes. Let them. You don't need to change them in order to validate who you are as a parent. Right. And I think often that originates from like a deeper seated need to be seen and acknowledged, and to let go of that. You're not going to be seen for being flexible. They're not going to give that to you. They didn't most likely give it to you when you were married. Right. And they're definitely not going to give you any of that when you're divorced. So look for it either from yourself, right? Like plugging back into yourself. I am worthy. I am a good parent. I'm doing this in the way that I like. Giving that acknowledgement and that self-compassion. Like, this is hard. Yeah. Instead of getting those cables that are plugged into the co-parent, I want him to see that I'm a good mom. No, you're an amazing mom. You don't need validation from your co-parent or the fact that he's doing it like you. And that, the shift, and that's a boundary, right? Is like, I don't, it's a boundary. It's a boundary of I'm not going to seek a validation from the other person. I seek it from myself, right? Because boundaries are about what am I willing to do and what am I not willing to do? Not what is he going to do for me so that I get my need met or I want them to change. Often people look towards the other person to create boundaries for them, but boundaries are for ourselves. We create them for ourselves. And if you can be really solid in that, that's empowerment. Yeah. Wow. If I've learned one thing in my life, it's that everything comes down to doing the internal work in yourself, don't you think? Yes. 100%. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. So
My last question is, what are the 6 C's of co-parenting?
Okay.
We'll leave people with, some letters that they can hold on to.
Yes. So these 6 C's basically outline the foundational structure that a co-parenting system, I say, should have in order that your child has a secure 2-home or 1-home, if you're a bird nesting system. And they're based on how does the kid feel secure? So commitment, which is really committing to the co-parenting relationship and saying goodbye to the romantic one. Collaboration, which is about creating a collaborative narrative of the divorce and getting on the same page as best as you can around values and parenting style. Clarity, which is all about, respectful communication to minimize conflict and to, increase more intentional, healthy communication patterns. Consistency. Kids need consistency in and between 2 homes in order to feel like they have, again, a safe environment. They know what to expect. Kids love routines and structure. Connection. This one is all about maintaining connection with your child in your home so that they feel seen and heard and valued, and that you are present to their emotions. This way that you can help them process through their emotions and their grief or whatever they're going through, so that they can actually move through it and not get stuck in any kind of trauma or feel alone, because that's actually what causes trauma, is when a child feels alone in their emotions. So connection is so important for a child's sense of security.
Yeah.
And then community. We all need community. We're social beings. We need a sense of belonging. So fostering community for yourself, hopefully your co-parent does as well for themselves, and most importantly, obviously, for your child, so that they have a sense of belonging that's, beyond just you, but, it could be the extended family, friends, support systems, school folks, administrators, teachers, all that. And then overall, that will support your co-parenting system. So those are the 6 C's.
Okay, amazing. And one last time, I want to show everyone this book because it is really good. It's very practical. There is the theoretical and conceptual aspects, but also a ton of practical stuff in here. So, Aurisha, thank you so much for being here. Very useful information.
Thank you, Holly, for having me. This was a lovely conversation.
I've got just a little bit more to say. When I read this book and I was preparing for this episode, I really thought Aurisha was going to solve the mystery, the ongoing issue of what do you do when the other co-parent is not on board? And what she did was just remind me it always comes down to personal responsibility and the internal work that we do in ourselves. Who'd have thunk in co-parenting, which requires 2 people, that it really comes down to the work that you're doing in yourself? But it absolutely does. So if you just watch that episode and you feel like, there's no hope, the person that I'm co-parenting with is so difficult, they're narcissistic, they're uncooperative, they're not looking out for the best interest of the child, there is hope, because it really comes down to you, and you were made for more.